Thank you so much for coming to this talk. I'm very aware of the fact, maybe if these lights were to come up. Yeah. I'm very aware of the fact that we're almost at the end of the conference. And you're probably all exhausted for the past 2 days and dying to go get a drink outside and something to eat. I will do my best to try and keep you awake, but I cannot promise anything. Thank you for coming to this talk, which I can't stop thinking it is a bit of a strange talk because it's about something that is very important to the software development, which is version control, but is from the perspective of a designer. So what the hell is this about? Before I start, I would like to apologize profusely to any designers in the room because I do know that some of the things I'm going to say might be slightly controversial. But I want you to keep in mind that everything I'm going to say is from the deepest understanding and the deepest empathy with designers in the room because I am a designer myself. I am an interaction designer, and to explain to you what interaction design is, I need to introduce you to someone. This venerable-looking man was, sadly, Bill Moggridge. Bill Moggridge was an industrial designer. He was one of the founders of a very famous industrial design company called IDEO. And he's also credited with another Bill Verplank, with coining the term interaction design back in the 1980s. And what the Bills meant by interaction design was actually quite simple. It was the application of methods and approaches of industrial design to software. When industrial designers start thinking about a new product, a new physical thing, they start by thinking first and foremost about the people who are going to use that thing. What are they going to use it for and why? And so interaction designers inherit this tradition. And so we look at software from the perspective of the people who use it. We worry about why people use the software. What are the problems they're trying to solve with it? What is it that they're trying to do? In which context and circumstances they're using that software? And why they decide to use it? Because as interaction designers, we are not responsible for building software that works. That is the responsibility of software engineers. But we are responsible for building software that makes sense to the people who use it. And you may have noticed that I haven't said software that is easy to use. I've said software that makes sense to the people who use it. And I do that very much on purpose, because there are some things out there that can never be made simple. And Git and version control is one of them. This is the story of how an interaction designer managed to learn Git. I will not have a list of, I'm going to tell you the story of how I managed to learn Git. That doesn't mean that that is the only way of learning Git, or that is that way of teaching Git. It's going to work for all designers. I don't have a bag of magic tricks for you, not even a set of best practices. I have only my personal experience to share with you. No more, no less. And the reason why I bother to come here today with this talk is because I really want all software engineers out there to bother teaching Git to every designer they know. And if I manage to convince you, you will all find yourselves in the position of having to teach Git to a designer. And brace yourselves, because it is not easy. This is a story in 3 parts. I'm going to tell you first how I learned Git. Then I'm going to tell you why I think you should teach Git to designers and why I think designers should bother learning Git. And finally, I will utterly embarrass myself by confessing to you all how long it took me to learn Git. Are you ready? Yeah? Right, so let's start with how. I first came across Git about 8 years ago when I became the designer of something called the Yocto Project. And the Yocto Project is a project that is under the umbrella of the Linux Foundation, and it is a set of tools for creating and maintaining customized Linux distributions for embedded devices, between them a build system. The first time I heard this sentence, I don't think I understood any single word of it, apart from the articles and the prepositions. I didn't know what Linux was. I didn't know what a distribution was. I didn't know what an embedded device was. And a build system? No idea. Right? So imagine the picture. Middle manager in big technology corporation approaches Linux engineer and says to him, hey, here is this designer. She doesn't have a clue about what it is you do, but she's here to help you. Yeah, whatever. That's what I would have thought. Luckily for me, this Linux engineer didn't think that at all. His name was Paul Eggleton, and he was a very special man. He didn't think, yeah, right, whatever. He thought the Yocto project could do with all the help that came its way, including the help of a designer. So he proceeded to try and teach me as much about the Yocto project as I was able to take in. One of my jobs inside the Yocto project was designing and helping build a web interface for their build system. Imagine like something like GitHub and GitLab, but for a Linux build system. And after a few months of research and some design work, we started to build this thing. And I really needed to keep track of the progress we were making and make sure that the implementation was matching the design work that we had done before. The Yocto project, it deals with Linux things, and so it borrows a lot of processes, methods, and tools from the Linux kernel project. And one of them is Git for version control. And this is how things worked roughly. Software developers worked out of work-in-progress branches that were based on the master branch. And they would work on these work-in-project branches until they felt that they had some work that they wanted to submit for review, so they created a set of patches, sent them to a mailing list that would be reviewed by the rest of the contributors of the project, and eventually merged back into the master branch. I'm sure you're all familiar with this kind of thing. Before I learned Git, if I wanted to check any of the changes that people were making to the web interface or any of the patches that were being submitted to the mailing list, I had to ask one of the software engineers that were working with me if they could pull the changes and run an instance of the web application, including those changes, so that I could check it. That was a real pain in the ass for me. Mostly because I knew I was an even bigger pain in the ass for the engineers that worked with me. They were super busy people. And yet, every time I wanted to check something, which was pretty much all the time, they had to stop whatever they were doing, and they need to set up this thing for me. Sure, it wasn't that much work, but when you get interrupted all the time with this thing and you don't have the resources to automate the workflow, it can become really annoying. So and then, understandably, these software engineers got sick of it. They got fed up. But instead of telling me to go away and stop bothering me, they decided to teach me how to do it. And this is the first interesting thing about how I learned Git. I learned Git on a need-to-know basis. Basically, I was taught whatever I need to know at any given time in order to do my design work better. This is Paul Eggleton explaining this himself.
I wasn't really giving you a training course. I was just helping you to get your work done. And if I kind of flooded you with all this, it's like day one. Let's do a rebase. It'd be like, oh. So I think it probably really does help having someone to guide you through that step by step, and so that you can just cut to the what's important. How do we actually use this to do something useful?
How do you actually use this to do something useful? This is the key. So if you are facing with the challenge of teaching Git to a designer, just teach them on a need-to-know basis. Just teach them whatever it is that they need to know at any point in time to do their job better and more independently. And at that time, this is what the developers told me. Belen, we have a special place where we keep all our work in progress. Okay? You need to make a local copy of this special place. And in order to do that, you need to write this on a terminal window. Belen, in this special place, there is a list of things that are called branches. What you need to do is to choose, our changes, by the way, will be in one of these branch thingies, and you need to choose the right one in your local copy of the special place. And to do that, you have to type this in a terminal window. And then this is how you run the web application. Okay? Obviously, I was cloning a repository and checking out a branch. But the developers didn't tell me this. They didn't explain to me what a repo was. They didn't explain to me what a branch was. They just told me this is what you do. They explained things to me in ways I could understand. And this is the second great thing that they did that I'd like to share with you. If you're faced with the challenge of teaching Git to a designer, just avoid the Git jargon. Git has a ton of jargon. Absolutely all of it is completely incomprehensible to non-Git people. It is also very off-putting. To sum up, it scares the bejesus out of you. So just don't use it. Don't bother too much with it. I'm so glad of hearing that. And just, try and explain things in ways that people can understand. After I learned how to check out a branch, I had to be able to update that branch because these were work-in-progress branches, so people were kept on pushing changes to them. So I needed to be able to update them. So the developers told me that to do that, I had to do this thing called git pull. And a few months later, they changed their mind, and they told me to do git fetch. OK. They never explained to me what was the difference between these two things or why they decided to change their minds. And you know what? I didn't bother asking either, because the truth is that I don't care. As a designer, I don't care about all the intricacies of version control. I don't care about the differences between fetching and pulling. I just use Git on a need-to-know basis. Okay? So don't bother too much with the concepts, particularly at the beginning, because probably people are not going to understand them anyway. If you try and teach them the Git concepts, they are very abstract, and they are very hard to learn, like out cold. Instead of trying to teach them all at the same time, you let your designers learn the concepts progressively as they use Git, as they do things with Git. This is a slower way to learn, but it is also a much more resilient and long-lasting way to learn. After that, the next thing I wanted to do as a designer was submitting tiny patches. I wanted to fix small things in the web interface that weren't quite all right, like pixel alignment things or, typos, silly things like that. And in order to do that, I had to learn a whole bunch of new stuff. I had to learn how to create a branch. I had to learn how to commit my changes, and very importantly, how to write good commit messages. If I learned how to create a branch, I had to learn how to delete it, which, by the way, took me ages to do. I had to learn how to change a commit, just in case I made a typo in the commit message or just I did something completely wrong. And finally, I had to learn how to push my changes to a remote repository. This was a lot to learn. So every time I need to learn something new, Paul Eggleton would come and sit down with me and do things with me. So he would say, Belen, this is what you do. First you type this, and I would type it. And then you type this other thing, and I would type it. Right? But he didn't do things for me. He did things with me. I had to do all the things myself. He was just directing me and helping me as I went along. And this is incredibly important to the way I learned as well, because Git is so complicated that it is impossible to learn by observation only. It's almost like you have to develop muscle memory. And a way to develop muscle memory is to type in the commands yourself. So never do things for your designers. You do things with them. Now, if you're going to take the trouble to actually sit down with your designers and do things with them, what you're aiming for is to having to explain these things only once. The designer really needs to put the best of themselves to try and understand this on the first go. So you don't have to repeat yourself over and over again. And the best way of doing that is to take notes. Right? So if you sit down with your designer and they don't have pen and paper with them, which is weird because designers most of the time do, tell them to go get some. Okay? And then encourage them to keep a cheat sheet where they can keep their notes on how to do certain stuff. And this is an image from mine, which very originally it was called Useful Things. Right? I learned loads of other things after this. I learned how to initialize a local directory as a Git repository. I learned how to set up remotes. I learned how to reset branches, super useful. I learned how to create patches, how to apply patches, how to use Git, send email to send those patches to a mailing list. I learned how to rebase, and even how to fix conflicts. Oh, my goodness. But by then, something had changed. I had grasped the basic concepts of Git, and so no longer needed the developers to explain everything to me. I could go on the web and search for stuff and learn things by myself using Stack Overflow or Git SCM, or all these things that are available out there. So I had become an independent Git learner. As your designers reach this point, you will have to spend less and less time with them explaining them things. When your designers reach this point, you can sit down and relax. Congratulations, you have managed to teach Git to a designer. It's no mean feat. Now, you may have noticed that all along, these people taught me how to do things on the command line. I have no idea why they decided to do this way, but I'm immensely grateful that they did. They could have taught me instead how to use any of the very many graphical user interfaces that exist for Git, but instead, they taught me the commands. And the reason why I'm so thankful that they did this is because before learning Git with them, I had tried to use some of those graphical user interfaces for Git, and I was completely incapable. They made no sense whatsoever to me. This is because all Git graphical user interfaces expose what we call the system model of Git. And therefore, it is impossible for people who do not know Git to understand them. Let me explain what I mean. If you speak to usability people, they will tell you that graphical user interfaces should not reflect the way the system really works. That's what they call the system model. They should reflect the way people think the system works. And that's what they call the mental model. Mental models are often inaccurate and incomplete, but they work. They work in the sense that allow us to do things without having to know everything about everything. The general recommendation in design is that your graphical user interfaces should match and conform to the user's mental model. And in general, I think this advice is spot on. It works quite well for most things, particularly for simple things or silly things like washing machines or buying books on the internet. The problem is that I'm not sure this works with Git at all. You see, people who do not use Git do not have a mental model of Git. Why would they? They never used it for anything. And software developers don't really have a mental model about Git either, because it is their job to understand the system model. And so there is no mental model that Git graphical user interfaces can actually conform to. And if you look at them, all of them reproduce this and expose the system model of Git. They all organize their content in repositories, and they talk about commits and branches and clones and so on and so forth. If you don't know Git and you don't know what these things mean, this interface is unusable to you. So that's why you need to teach your designers how to do things on the command line. Because once they have understood the fundamentals, they'll be able to go and use any of their graphical user interfaces for Git without any problem whatsoever, right? And it doesn't matter how much they complain about this. You still teach them the command line way, okay? So this is how I learned Git. The question is why? Why should designers learn Git? And why should software engineers teach Git to people? Well, I put this section in mostly because Paul told me to.
I guess patience is really important too. Just to help the person to understand why this is important. Why should you learn how to use this tool?
Why should you learn how to use this tool? Well, at this point, I have bad news for you. It is very possible that before you can teach Git to a designer, you will have to convince the designer in the first place that they should learn Git. And I've put this content in here to try and give you the arguments to try and convince them. You see, there are a lot of designers out there who genuinely believe that learning things like version control is not part of their jobs. I humbly and very respectfully disagree. Designers don't need to know everything there is to know about version control or Git. Designers, in the same way, do not need to know how to write production quality code. But they absolutely need to know enough about software in order to make sound design decisions. Why? Because software is their design material. You see, if you look at product designers, right, the people who design and make physical products, these people have loads of materials at their disposal. They have wood and glass and ceramics and all sorts of plastics. They have, I don't know, cloth and, stuff like that. Loads of things they could use. Product designers don't need to know everything there is to know about these materials. They don't need to be material scientists. But they absolutely need to know enough about those materials in order to make sound design decisions about which ones they should use in their products. If you're an interaction designer or you're a graphic designer creating assets for software, software is your design material. And version control is absolutely core to the way software is produced. So you should understand enough about it. So the reality is that when you teach designers about Git, they are not really learning Git. They are not really learning version control either. What they are really learning is about software as design material. The second reason why I think you should teach Git to designers should learn Git, is because it allows them to collaborate more effectively with software developers. What you're aiming for is to turn designers into your partners in building. This is Paul again, talking about collaboration.
It's really about being able to participate in the development process. If you have access to the Git repository and know how to make use of it to get your work done, then you're able to directly influence the thing that we're working on. And we're able to work together as well, because that's one of the things that Git does really well. It helps people to, if they take advantage of it, to work together, to collaborate, I suppose. So if you're not doing that, then you're kind of one layer removed. You're kind of relying on someone else to put your changes in. And it's just this huge barrier between you and getting your changes actually integrated.
What Paul called the barrier, I call the wall. You see, I've come across loads of places that are structured in this way. There is a wall. One side of the wall are the designers. On the other side of the wall are the developers. Designers on their side of the wall design their stuff. And when they think you're done, they throw their stuff to the other side of the wall, and developers pick it up, and they try to build it the best they can. But it never occurs to them to reach to the other side of the wall when they have a question about something. Some people think that working in agile ways or in open source type of ways is enough to get rid of the wall. Well, I have news for you, that's not true. This is because the wall is not made of bricks. The wall is made of attitudes. In my experience, teaching Git to designers is one of the best ways there are to undermine the wall. It's not that you are tackling the wall directly. You're not trying to destroy the wall. It's more like you're trying to dig a tunnel under the wall. It's kind of this sneaky way of getting rid of the wall culture. And once your designers understand Git, they will be much more able to become what they should be, which is your close partners in building your software. There is a third reason why I think designers should learn about Git, and it is that knowing Git gives them the ability to participate in the development process in their own terms and to exercise a meaningful influence in that development process. And again, this is Paul talking about.
Yeah, and if you're a designer working on a project where the developers you're working with are using Git, then as we were talking about earlier, if you don't, if you want to make changes to the software or aspects of the software, if you're not able to use Git, and then you're not going to be directly participating. You're going to have to go through someone else, and that inevitably means that you're going to be somehow removed from that process. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have as much influence over the final product, and that I think would be quite frustrating. Mm. At least it would be for me. So,
influence. That's what designers are aiming for, and that's what Git allows them to have. Influence. And this is how it happened for me in the Yocto project. When I learned Git, all of a sudden I did realize that I had new powers. I was now able to pick up any patches that were sent onto the mailing list and touch the web interface and check them out before they were merged into the main tree. That changed everything. Okay, for me, that changed absolutely everything, because these patches were coming from all over the world. They were coming from developers who had never met me before, who had never worked with me directly, but they were affecting the quality of our design. And so if they went in without me checking and verifying that they were as they should be, they could undermine the quality of our web interface, of all that hard design work that we had to do before. Being able to grab those patches and check them out before they went into the main tree meant that I could enforce somehow this idea of design reviews. So in the same way that you send your code to the mailing list and you accept that your peers, other software developers, will review the code and give you feedback, when your patches touch the interface, affect the design, you have to come used to the idea that I will come and give you feedback about your implementation of the design. And you will have to accept that feedback, go back, implement it, and then come back again with your patches. That was difficult. It took about 6 months of me making sure that I reviewed every single patch that went into the mailing list and touched the web interface. People moaned and complained, who is this lady that come and tell us and send us patches back? In the end, they came round. Right? And they started to work with me much closer together, so they would send me their patches before they submitted, so we could work iteratively on that implementation to make sure that it was spot on by the time they sent the patch to the mailing list. And once they got used to this, I actually put it in writing. I kind of formalized this design process to make sure that any other designers that came after me could adopt it and had the backing to be listened to if they wanted to review and get feedback on those patches. Influence. Meaningful influence. So teaching Git to your designers will help them exercise the influence and to put that they need to exercise in order to warranty the quality of the interface and the design of your software. And it will also guarantee that they can participate in the software development process in their own terms. And that's very powerful, right? Finally, there is another reason, one last reason why I think designers should learn Git. You see, 6 years ago, the very few interaction designers involved in free and open source software got together for the very first time at FOSDEM. And out of that kind of meeting, we kind of formulated this idea of open source design. And we keep on wondering, why are so very few designers who are willing to contribute to free and open source software? Well, the reality is that those designers face a phenomenal barrier to entry. And one of the main barriers to entry is the fact that they do not understand many of the tools that free and open source projects use to organize themselves. And that can be really frustrating, but also it can make them feel quite threatened, a bit rejected, and in general, a bit pissed off. Okay? By teaching Git to designers, you're actually helping them to overcome that barrier. You're empowering those designers to easily start contributing to free and open source software if that's what they want to do. So that's why I think you should teach Git to designers and why designers should learn Git. I'm coming to the end of my story. There's just one piece of information that I haven't given you yet. How long is it going to take? How long is it actually going to take for your designers to learn Git? Well, I don't know. I can only tell you how long it took for me. And this is a bit embarrassing. Because you see, it took me 2 years. 2 years it took me to grasp the fundamentals of Git. But you know what? It was worth every single minute of it. So yes, it's going to take a long, long time. Yes, it's going to be quite a bit of effort. Yeah, it's going to require a lot of patience from you. But once you've taught Git to a designer, in the other side of the process, you're going to have designers who are better equipped to make design decisions about your software. You're going to have designers who are better capable to collaborate with you. You're going to have designers that are empowered to influence and to make meaningful influence and participate in meaningful ways in the development process. And you're going to have designers that are empowered to contribute to free and open source software if they want to do so. But most importantly, you will have designers who will be forever grateful to you for teaching them Git. Thank you very much, everybody. General wonderment.
I don't know exactly how long I use Git. A couple of years now, and still there are things I haven't touched. And if I have to touch them, I have colleagues around. I can ask, should I do the rebase? Usually the answer is, oh my goodness, don't. I should. So everything you told rang a bell in me. So I've come along the same path almost. I have a folder where physical folder where I store some printouts with hand notes, and so it's the most powerful version control system I've encountered. I think it's number 5 now in my career, and still, and really, I appreciate what Linus Torvalds did there. Incredible, but in some points, I think it could be improved. Yeah. So there are some options are not named nicely, and how paths are specified, especially if you're on Windows. That's a pain in the ass, but got nothing to do with Git itself. what was a big barrier for me was the differences between remote and local. Local, and what the branches are. And yes, I used a lot of graphical tools before because I thought it should make things easier. It doesn't, as you said.
It doesn't.
And I'm back to the command line. I don't use visual tools anymore except for merging. The thing, mental model and system model, I think unfortunately that's reality. It shouldn't be that way. So the system model was system model. So I think coders should take more time to consider that and make this gap disappear. So the mental model should be very close to the system model.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a visual-oriented person. I say I have some diagrams for how various repositories can interact, and they help me a lot in understanding what I key in on the command line.
Yeah, I think everything you say is spot on, and I agree with absolutely all of it. And I think you're right that Git could be improved. Not could just be improved, it could be improved a lot by, as you say, trying to bring together the system and the mental models a little bit. What I would love to see is the people who maintain Git actually willing to engage in a user research exercise. But I've been in, I don't know them personally, but I'm not sure what they would think about it. But here it is on video. Maybe they'll come round and they knock on our door and say, hey, let's do some user research with Git users, right? But yeah, and it's great to hear that it's very encouraging for me to hear a person who's gone through 5 different version control systems and very honestly telling me that it was difficult for them as well, because it means that, maybe I'm not that thick or as thick as I thought I was. So thanks for sharing that. Any other comments? Yeah.
I just want to slightly parallel what's been said. I've gone not through 5, but through 4, and I must admit I've fought Git for as long as I can. Bitbucket has finally killed Mercurial for me. To me, Mercurial, the commands are more intuitive. I've come from Subversion to Mercurial. It made a lot more sense. I do not understand Git. And it's just listening to you, I must say, challenge accepted. I think there's scope for a nice Git command, which actually just wraps Git into commands that use command line parameters that are intuitive or more intuitive. And perhaps I'll contact you afterwards and maybe we can negotiate something about a user interface.
Yeah.
Who cares about the details? You just got a primary workflow that you're trying to implement.
Yeah.
Focus on that.
Yes,
it's powerful. Yes, it can do all sorts of things. Would I ever want to? Probably not.
Yeah, I think you point to a very interesting thing. There are so many people who use Git, and all of them use them in slightly different ways. I've come across a lot of projects, and all of them have slightly different procedures. Maybe there could be a way of actually taking a subset of Git and turn it into, a standalone version control system that works for a specific group of people or a specific project. I think that's a spot on. I'm happy to talk about graphical user interfaces or command line ones as well.
So I think it's very important to see that Git is you said it's a version control system, right? That's what it's called, and it's not really good as a pure collaboration system, I would say, right? It's good for collaboration when it needs the version control, when it needs the ability to roll back and have tags and whatever. But if you want to do collaboration, then you're basically better off with some sort of shared folder. And so I think you might be aware of the software called Sparkle Share, where GNOME designers actually did this. They abstracted everything away. They still use Git, and everyone can install it, and you just have to put in the server. But then the commits just look like add file name, remove file name, modify file name, right? The log or the commit log is essentially useless, to a certain extent. But it makes it very, very easy for collaboration. And yeah, also something on the I think you lightly touched on the wording in the beginning. Last year I was at a university with design students, and I kind of tried to have them use Git, or let's say GitHub, because what actually was easiest is for them to just use the web interface to just upload their files. I tried a bit with the GitHub for Desktop client, which I think is actually very different to existing desktop apps, and it's quite useful. But one of the biggest problem is simply the words, like the word pull and push. Just call it download and upload, essentially, you know, and commit, like why do you have to save again to then be able to upload, and so on and so on. Yeah. So yeah, these tiny hurdles, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. About the words, that's why I think it's so important to be able to explain things beyond those words. You need to link those words, those commands, to concepts and things people can actually understand. So then the pull and the push, or the pull and the fetch, whatever, they just become kind of the wrapper to those concepts that people understand. About the students' stuff on GitHub, I totally understand. I think when you are engaging with the students for a very short period of time, you kind of have to work around that, and the most efficient way is just teach them. But I think it's not sustainable either because of that issue I explained before, that if you don't understand the basic concepts, GitHub puts them in your face. So it's just in the long term, and if you have the time and the luxury of time, you should try and make sure that people understand the concepts. But I totally understand. It is hard, and there are loads of little hurdles. And about what collaboration means in SparkleShare, the SparkleShare people did a wonderful thing. You know, it's a great little piece of software. But I think what collaboration actually is and how it's made easier or harder is highly contextual. So for some people, like designers like us, using SparkleShare might be easier for collaboration. For people like Paul, he actually prefers Git. So I think with these higher level concepts, collaboration means different things for different people, and it's easier or harder in different ways. But yeah, I agree, SparkleShare is really good.
I was going to add a comment from a software developer's perspective. So I am a software developer. I started with my first version control system was SCCS a long time ago. And I think what you're saying about Git, I would see it, so to reassure you, I don't think I understand Git completely, even though I spent a lot of time using it. And to your point, that I would see it as if you want to learn a complicated human language. I don't know if I'm French speaking and I had to learn German. It was difficult for me. You can reduce that to a subset and you still go by. You know, you can, by speaking minimum German, you can still order a beer and pizza and something and survive. And I would do the same in Git and really restrict yourself to a small subset of the commands. Like you were saying, if you know how to do clone and commit and push, you're already in business, and maybe basic usage of the branches, and that's good enough. And one thing with Git is that if you don't understand the command, do not use it. With Git, you contrary, so you were mentioning Subversion. With Subversion, you cannot destroy anything. With Git, you can. So you should really be careful if you don't understand something. Like in German, if you don't understand a word, don't use it. It's safer.
I've heard this many times. Listen to this man. This is very good advice. If you don't know what the command does, don't use it. Any other questions or comments? Lovely. So we're done. Thank you very much.